You're listening to IceBreakers, the podcast exploring all things Canadian and Eurasian, business, culture, and personalities. The series is produced by CECC, the Canada-Eurasia Chamber of Commerce. We are a nonprofit focusing on trade, investment, and good relations between Canada and the countries of Eurasia. I'm your host, Nathan Hunt, one of the founders of CECC and former chairman of the National Board. I invite you to tune in regularly for valuable insights related to the region. I'm joined today by Daren Klinck, President and Director of Aris Minerals, a Canadian junior mining and exploration company. He's a graduate of the Haskayne School of Business at the University of Calgary and is a highly regarded mining executive with a broad range of international experience. Mr. Klinck was most recently president of Bluestone Resources, a Canadian public company focused on the development of a gold project in Guatemala. And prior to that, he spent more than 10 years in Australia and Canada as a senior executive for Oceana Gold Corporation, a Canadian and Australian public company with operating gold mines in New Zealand, the Philippines, and the USA. Good morning, Darren.
Good morning, Nathan. Great to be here.
It's a pleasure to welcome you. Please tell us a few words about yourself. Where did you grow up? How did you get interested in mining? Did you always know that you would be a miner, that mining and exploration was in your future? What got you on this track?
Yeah, well, no, there was really no early premonition of mining and exploration. In fact, I grew up as a fourth generation on the family farm in south central Alberta, about an hour northwest of Calgary, a little place called Didsbury. So there was plenty of oil and gas, around us. But I grew up as a country bumpkin, and it was not really until number of years after finishing university and traveling a little bit that I ended up in Vancouver, and through a friend was introduced to a mining executive and got involved there. But always been involved in the capital markets, interested in the capital markets, investing, but more in the oil and gas space, I guess, coming from Alberta.
I want you to know I'm still a country bumpkin.
Well, me too, actually, in many regards. I still like to get my fingernails dirty and get out in the dirt, to be honest. I don't think you can kind of beat that out of you.
No, I would agree with that. Now, you have a lot of pretty exotic countries, I would say, on your resume. The Philippines, New Zealand, Australia, El Salvador, and that crazy wild place south of the border called the USA. Guatemala, Laos, Myanmar. Did you ever live in any of those places? Do you have any stories you can tell us?
Yeah, well, I did. I spent 8 years, almost 8 years living in Australia. I spent a little bit of time, I guess almost 20 years ago, I lived in Thailand for a while as well. I had spent some time living in the US for a short period. But, really since 2014, I've been back here in Canada. But it's been quite interesting. I have to say, growing up in rural Alberta, a lot of those places I wouldn't have probably been able to point to in a map. But mining and exploration has really presented an opportunity to visit many different cultures and countries, and the food and the people and everything in between. So it's been good. Yeah, there's you tend to bounce around in this sort of industry. You find yourself in neat places at different times, not things that you plan for. I guess one of the early experiences in the northern part of Mexico. In fact, one of the few places where they actually get snow in the wintertime, high up in the Sierra. And we had a very close encounter with a light plane accident. It was very hot. It was in the summer. You're high up, so the captain wanted to try and get away, before the storms kind of set in. And we had a 6-seat Cessna up in the mountains on a kind of a man-made sort of cutout strip in the middle of a pine forest. And because we needed to get all the weight underneath the wings, I had to move from the back seat to the middle seat. So there was 3 people in 2 seat belts. And he fired up that plane at the end of the runway, sent the geologist 2/3 the way down to kind of as a marker, because if we weren't off the ground by then, he had to abort. And he got the plane fired up, headed down that kind of man-made carved out runway. And about maybe a quarter of the way down, we came about 6 feet off the ground, and then the plane abruptly came right back down again as we're hurtling down. So he was having a hard time getting lift.
Oh dear.
Yeah, it was a little bit scary, to be honest. But we entrusted everything in the captain, of course, as you do when you're in those light aircrafts. And just before we got to the abort spot, the plane did lift. But once we lifted and got above those pine trees, we had wind shear, and it shoved the plane. And I don't know how close, but it was very, very close that the wing of the plane was going to crash into these pine trees. And the fellow beside me, who was our geologist and had done this trip many times before, when his eyes opened and were obviously concerned, the rest of us were concerned, but we luckily got out of it, and the captain gave the thumbs up, and I crawled over the second seat and got my seatbelt on in the back row, and we made it to Chihuahua. So,
wow.
Yeah.
So that was a close encounter.
Yeah, that's probably a bit too close. I think you never really want to have those sort of experiences, but you know, the number of people that, you know, I've spoke with over the years that do work in our industry, and of course you do rely on helicopters and light planes, and, you know, of course, mines today are discovered and operated often in remote parts of the world. I mean, these are the sorts of tools you need to get there, and so.
Now, you had a story about the Philippines. Tell us what happened in the Philippines. I remember.
Yeah, well, the project that we developed in the Philippines, this is back in 2000. First went in there in 2007. I started to do a bit of research on it, and in fact, in that area, historically, back in the early 1900s, but in fact, I think as late as the early 1980s, was populated by a tribal group, and they were headhunters.
Yikes!
Yeah, 25 years later, we were there, and that tribe had kind of moved on and dispersed. But I understand that it was in the early 1980s, so only 25 years earlier, where the last head was taken. So,
did you lose any exploration engineers to the headhunters?
No, not at all. But still pretty remote to get in there. Difficult place to get to, and of course now the infrastructure has been put in, much easier to get to.
And you had a story about Myanmar?
Yeah, we another one of the real interesting places having a chance to go to is it was kind of in the window when things started to open up. Myanmar and the junta had kind of stepped aside, although obviously things have changed there in the last couple of years again. But yeah, we were there looking at a couple of projects actually in the eastern part of the country, and had flown into Yangon and then traveled up to Nay Pyi Taw. And one of the fellows that was with us had been in and out of there quite a bit years before into Mandalay, which is to the north. And he told of a story about Nay Pyi Taw, like he was flying in and out from Yangon to Mandalay, and going over 2/3 of the way up in the plane, looking out the window and seeing this mass construction site. But it was in the middle of nowhere, effectively, right? It's, you know, I think 4 hours by car north of Yangon, and not really knowing what it was, and no one really knew what it was until a couple of years later. We're on, I think it was a Friday morning, there was an announcement from the government in Yangon that as of the following Monday, the capital city was being changed from Yangon to Nay Pyi Taw, and all the public service workers would be requested and expected to report to work on Monday morning in a city that was, you know, a 4-hour drive to the north. And here is this new capital city that effectively was created, complete with a big parliament building, complete with, believe it or not, a 20-lane highway in front of the parliament, complete with accommodation and lodging for all the public service workers. And so, yeah, I found myself in Nay Pyi Taw, in this manufactured capital city, and all this infrastructure, but not many people around.
But that didn't last. The capital is still Rangoon, I thought, last time I checked.
All the government offices and everything is in Nay Pyi Taw. Yeah.
Is it right? Is that right? I'm showing my ignorance.
Yeah, so fascinating part of the world.
So you had a story about the USA too, as I recall.
Well, yeah, another one, I guess, in my experience in South Carolina a number of years ago, where we acquired. This is when I was with Oceana Gold, and we acquired a company, and they had done a great job on advancing a project and getting the permits, and then we had acquired it and then built the mine in South Carolina. But I think I didn't realize, and most people that you come across, the U.S. sort of gold rush in the northern part of California is very well known, 1849. But in fact, the first gold rush in the United States occurred in South Carolina.
Gold rush in South Carolina.
Gold rush in South Carolina. So the first gold was discovered not far from where we developed that gold mine. And it was actually discovered, I think, by a 10 or 12-year-old boy, 1799, I think it was. He was out playing in a local stream and came back and with a 17-pound rock that was kind of shiny.
17 pounds of gold. That's a lot of gold. Well,
at the time, they didn't know it was gold. They didn't know it was gold. And so the father looked at it, didn't recognize it. They were farmers. And so it sat in the house as a doorstop for a couple of years.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And then I guess the story, as it goes, was that the father had taken it in to town one day to a local jeweler, and the local jeweler had identified what it was, but the farmer still didn't know what it was. And so the local jeweler ended up purchasing this 17-pound rock that was kind of shiny and I guess nice to look at for, at that time, what was reported as $3.50, which in today's dollars, I think is about $66.
And how much was the rock worth in today's dollars?
Like $500,000.
Wow.
But the good story, from what I understand, was that once it kind of got out that in fact that was a gold nugget, and unfortunately this farmer had kind of lost out. He then went back and actually started to look for more and found more gold. So I think he made out okay, but he obviously he missed out on the first payday. The first big chunk.
What a story. Good Lord. And your company, was it Oceana at that time or the other one?
Oceana Gold, yeah, that developed that mine in South Carolina.
And that's the same deposit that farmer had discovered 200 years earlier?
No, different deposit. In fact, there's all sorts of different deposits in that whole belt. We're going right down into Georgia, in fact, and then further north up into North Carolina. But yeah, different deposit, but same general area, and not well known in the United States in terms of the gold.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Well, Aris Minerals is, of course, focused on Central Asia, which is the focus of our association and our podcast. What can you tell us about Central Asia? Why did you decide to look at that market? Were you familiar with the Eurasian markets before you went there? And what was new about working in that part of the world?
Right. Yeah. Well, it was actually my business partner, Tim Barry, who got involved first on and focusing really on Kazakhstan. But it was through his hard work where he started to evaluate other opportunities around the world, and then came across this opportunity in Kazakhstan, and he hadn't been involved in Kazakhstan or been there before either. But as he started to pull the layers of the onion back and understand more about the country and the geologic endowment, got very excited about it and was able to secure a deal on an asset. And then really over the last sort of 12 to 14 months, we've been able to pick up significant larger leases, and we're getting more and more excited all the time about the country and the geologic endowment and just the opportunity that exists there. But neither of us had ever been there before.
So what are your first impressions of Kazakhstan? Do you find it different, similar to Canada? What impressed you about the city or the people?
Yeah, well, I think I did spend a little bit of time in the cities, but of course a lot of time out in the rural areas where the project's located. And definitely, again, going back as a kid from Alberta, the things that jumped out at me were a lot of the similarities to Canada, from the perspective of you're on the same latitude, right? So you see similar things growing, same sort of flowers in the flower boxes, etc. Similar looking cattle on the sides of the roads, etc. But of course, and also like Canada, big country and sparse population, right? So lots of wide open space as well. But yeah, I mean, it's a country that I'm still learning lots about. But from what I've seen and people that I've spoke to that have lived there for many years, and really with a lot of the changes that have taken place over the last 4 or 5 years with the reforms that the government is putting forth, we're really excited about it. And when I compare it to other parts of the world that I visited and worked in, I think Kazakhstan has a very bright future over the next 10, 20 years as these are implemented.
Now, you talk about reforms, and I remember during our Vancouver mining conference on the margins of the AME Roundup, you gave a presentation, and you called the Kazakh government. You said that they have a Western approach to doing business. What do you mean by Western approach, and what are these reforms that you speak of? How is their approach different from other countries in the region?
Yeah, well, I don't think it necessarily just applies to mining. In fact, in the Western approach, those are the words from President Tokayev in January to an address to Parliament, in fact. So I don't think I'm actually, those aren't even my words, but I think what he means and what we've heard from the government, and Ambassador Kamaldinov in Ottawa has been a huge supporter of ours, and many chances to speak with him about that as well, is that really, I think when it comes to mining and exploration, they're very much encouraging Western companies to come and invest and make new discoveries. That the playing field is perhaps, historically, years ago, there might have been special privileges to special groups, but really what I think President Tokayev is kind of outlining is that expectations on behalf of the government to create opportunities so that investors can feel comfortable in making those investments and coming to the country, and we've seen that firsthand and are very comfortable around the path forward, particularly when we compare it to other jurisdictions where there's always challenges.
So you said so investors can feel comfortable. Are investors comfortable going to Kazakhstan? Is it considered? I mean, have you had trouble raising capital, or there's no misconceptions about the region? There have been some negative stories coming out of Kyrgyzstan. There have been negative stories in other regions. How do you overcome those perceptions?
Yeah, well, perceptions are definitely important. There's no doubt, and I think myself included. If we were having this discussion, Nathan, 14 months ago, I wouldn't have been able to tell you much about Kazakhstan. Sitting here in Vancouver, I didn't really know much about that part of the world. I hadn't visited there. It's one of the few places that I haven't had a chance to kind of get to, and so obviously perceptions are incredibly important. But what we've found, I think, is you kind of better understand it, and having spent some time there, not a lot, but I'm looking forward to spending quite a bit of time there over the next number of years as we continue to move the project forward. And you come back with those stories and experiences, and you share those. And we're also expect to have other investors and analysts, et cetera, come over and visit. In many cases, I think for the first time. You start to see these things for yourself, and it resonates. It resonates very well. So I think when we think about investors and raising capital, we've been fortunate that we've been able to raise capital last year as a private company. We're still a private company right now, but are working quite shortly actually on a listing on the Toronto Stock Exchange venture. But what we have definitely found is that Europe and the UK, they understand Central Asia very well. Of course, it's closer, and they understand that Kazakhstan is definitely the leading country in that jurisdiction, in that area, from an investment perspective. But we still have plenty of work, I think, to do here in North America to improve that understanding.
Does Kazakhstan have special programs to help junior miners, to attract junior miners? Do they have special parts of the law that maybe are absent in other jurisdictions?
I don't know about necessarily, I would refer to it as special programs, but I think the transparency and also the ability to stake and acquire mineral licenses, the ability to get permits to initiate drill programs, very straightforward and expedient, much more so than many other jurisdictions. In fact, I think even here in Canada or many of the Latin American sort of countries, it takes much longer to do that. And so I think that in itself is something that's a real attraction for companies such as ourselves, the ability to get in, acquire ground, have legal tenor over those licenses, and then actually be able to get to work. Mm-hmm.
Is the Kazakh government supportive? I mean, surely they're supportive. Is there anything they could be doing more that, in your opinion, might help attract more investors, or speeding things up, or doing something differently?
I've been very impressed with, the candid discussions that, and I know Tim as well. Tim, my business partner on this, in fact, is relocating his family to Kazakhstan, which is a pretty big commitment as well. And I think it, underpins our commitment at RS Minerals to Kazakhstan and the opportunity here. We found that, our engagement with, the authorities in Kazakhstan, I mentioned about Ambassador Kamaldinov and his team in Ottawa, the Kazakh Invest team out of Washington, D.C. Both those offices have been very supportive of RS and helping us to maneuver in these very early years of RS's life, really over the last sort of 12 months. And, I think as we all say, I mean, we're all sort of supporters of Kazakhstan, supporters of RS Minerals, and supportive of exploration and development in Kazakhstan for the important minerals that we need in our society every day. And in fact, with things like copper, even more so if we want to continue to electrify globally, we're going to need a lot more copper than what we have today.
So, Darren, let me be frank. There was some unrest in the country at the start of the year. And God knows there's plenty of unrest in the country's big neighbor. How are you able to overcome that? Has that jaded investor perceptions, or is that something that you think has gone by the wayside? It's no longer a factor.
Yeah, I think, I think the crisis that took place in early January, it's fair to say, I think surprised everyone, and even companies and business executives that have been involved in Kazakhstan for many years. I think were caught off guard, as I think even the government was. For us, and I think for many of those individuals and companies as well, the swiftness at which the government was able to really manage that situation and turn it around and really get things back on track, I think was very well received. In fact, I think it's even in many regards from a process perspective, with some of the bureaucracy that exists in all governments. I mean, including Canada and the United States and all the Western worlds, we probably have some of the worst of it. But we've actually even seen some improvements to processes, since that's actually happened as well. When we look at the conflict, the Russian-Ukraine conflict, we definitely do get questions about that and what sort of impact our business is having in Kazakhstan. I think that it would be, not really being forthright to disregard the fact that the second longest border in the world exists between Russia and Kazakhstan, second only to the one that's between Canada and the United States, of course. But we haven't had an impact, and I think that short of obviously the volatility that you've seen in currencies in Central Asia, for example, the Kazakh government and many of the other countries really in that region have all taken a line to not make it overly political and focus on their economies, and also that I think what everyone wants is is a speedy resolution to this conflict, and that's definitely what we're hoping for as well.
Amen to that. Amen to that. So you're working towards a listing. What's the time frame for that?
We've been working on a listing here over the last number of months, and things seem to be coming along quite well. So we're hopeful here over the next next month or so we should be getting a listing on the Toronto Stock Exchange Venture. It's quite an exciting opportunity for us, and I think in this sort of era, really the first North American company focused on metals exploration and development, listed in North America, operating in Kazakhstan. So I know the embassy and Kazakh Invest and our partners in Kazakhstan are big proponents as well. So exciting times for us as we move forward.
And we'll give you a chance to do a little ad for the company. What are you going to be mining, and why is it better than any other competitors in the region?
Yeah, sure. So we're not going to be mining anything. We have quite a significant copper gold deposit in the northeastern part of the country, up in Pavlodar, that we have an option to earn in on and acquire. And then we've also acquired a number of other mineral leases and licenses in that same area, right? Kind of within a 2-hour, 3-hour drive of our base in the northeastern part of the country. And our focus is on copper gold. And so it's all about discovering and also in terms of the deposits that we do discover or that we do have, is ultimately making them bigger and hopefully at some point then in the future they're to a point that someone does actually, perhaps us down the road, want to develop those into operating copper mines.
Well, that's great. But so you think you will not be doing the mining yourself? You think you're going to do exploration and pass on the assets? Is that the plan?
Yeah, our focus right now is really on the exploration and the development. This is one of the reasons why I think when we think about strategic metals and we think about the stuff in everyday world that we need today, everything around us, everything in my office right here is either grown or it comes from the earth. And it takes a long time, from discovery of a mineral deposit to mining. In fact, there's various different statistics, but I think for large copper mines, I mean, it can be 15 or 20 years from initial discovery through to actually seeing that copper come out of the ground. And it's one of the reasons as well why many of the analysts in New York City, Wall Street, for example, are pointing to the fact that copper and the supply demand curve on copper is really going to get tight here over the next 3-4 years. So, I think for us, we've got a significant head start because the project that, we're focused on has had quite a bit of work on it over the last 10, 15 years. But we see a real opportunity here to grow that and enhance it. And that's really going to be our focus here over the next 2 to 3 years.
Not a bad time to be holding a copper asset, is what I'm hearing.
Absolutely, and I think if we pay any attention to what these Wall Street analysts are saying, the price of copper is going to go up again, just based on supply demand, right? I mean, the electrification of the world requires metals, and copper is one of the most strategic for that as well.
Now, again, I'll show my ignorance. Is your deposit a lot of gold with a little bit of copper, or primarily copper with a little bit of gold?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's similar to the project I was involved with in the Philippines many years ago, where it's actually got quite a high gold content. It's a copper gold project, but quite a high gold content currently. But again, I mean, this is as they refer to, it's a treasure hunt. So we're out looking for more, and we'll see what Mother Nature's put there.
Well, good for you. Do you have any advice for Canadian companies that want to go to Kazakhstan? What would you tell them?
Yeah, well, I think Canadian, North American, as I mentioned earlier, it's not a jurisdiction, it's not a part of the world where, perhaps for the most part, we've had a lot of experience in our space, particularly the companies that are listed here in Canada or the United States. There tends to be more of that north-south sort of trade and understanding. So Latin America being, of course, a stronger part. But I think, the advice would be to get over there and have a look. I mean, it was probably one of my biggest surprises, and all the places I've over the years traveled to, worked in, lived in. When I went to Kazakhstan, late last summer and came back, I was blown away by the opportunity and the people and the infrastructure. And it's get over there and have a look, because I think they're really they're doing what they need to do to incentivize and encourage investment, not only in the mineral space. I think the next 10 or 20 years are going to be very exciting there.
I have to agree with you. I think Almaty is a beautiful city with the mountains in the background, but Nur-Sultan is absolutely magical. I don't know. Did you have a chance to get up to the capital while you were there?
I did, yeah. And in fact, one of the pictures I show our investors and friends is a picture that I took outside the hotel room window when I opened up the drapes, and it reminded me of years ago when I was staying in Hong Kong on the Kowloon side. And you look across the water and you see these big office towers that are lit up with various advertisements, and of course there's no water there because Nur-Sultan. But I saw the big skyscrapers with all the advertisements on the side of them, and it was not what I was expecting. A very modern city that was pretty impressive.
Very modern and quite eclectic. You have traces of other cultures and civilizations all around. You have a Chinese pagoda. You have a Dutch kind of windmill style building. You have all sorts of fascinating. You have a tent. The largest tent in the world, I'm told, is the shopping mall. It's quite a place, isn't it?
The history in this part of the world is quite amazing. And to be honest, I'm not across even a fraction of it. But as I continue to dig, it's definitely a part of the world that I want to continue to learn more about, because there's much older than Canada. 100 years here is old.
Yeah, of course.
In modern times anyways. But no, absolutely.
Now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that the CECC has a big event coming up jointly with Kazakhstan. We have our so-called Kazakhstan-Canada Business Council, something that we hold biannually. And this fall, we will be having a joint event where we have working groups focusing on specific sectors, and we'll have a plenary session where we invite officials from both countries to talk about the potential and developments and changes and improvements and reforms in all sorts of sectors. Will RS Minerals be participating in that this year?
Yeah, absolutely. We're looking forward to participating in that, particularly around the mining and natural resources, and what a great time as well to get involved. And so we're looking forward to it. And I think it's, as I mentioned earlier, there's lots of exciting things, I think, on the horizon between Canada and Kazakhstan on the trade front, having had a chance to speak with the ambassador about that on a number of occasions. And we look forward to getting involved as we grow as well.
I think I read in your bio that you've raised over $800 million in equity and debt for various mining and metal projects through the years. That seems like quite a bit. What's your secret?
Well, it's not an individual thing. I've been part of teams that have had to do that, around the world for various different projects. And this is one of the things I think when we think about, mineral development, is it does tend to be quite capital intensive, right? It's things that we need in our everyday life. As I said, everything around us is has either been grown or comes from the earth, but it does require capital in order to kind of build and operate these mines. And so I don't necessarily know that it's a secret. I guess one thing I'd probably throw up is that sometimes, raising larger amounts is easier than raising smaller amounts. It usually involves the risk profile, I guess, and the differences. So sometimes raising $2 million is harder than raising 200 million. But no, it's a fascinating industry. As I said, it's not one that I would have kind of picked myself of working in when I was a country kid in Alberta, but learned a lot and met lots of very interesting people and visited lots of very interesting places.
So I got to ask you before we close out here, what made you a leader in your own, in 30 seconds or less, what made Daren Klinck a leader?
It's a tough one. I think, you never really, or often you never really necessarily think of yourself as a leader when you're growing up. But for me, I think it's my roots, right? I think, I was instilled in me as a young kid on the farm, the importance of respect. Probably one of the most important values I think out there for leaders today is, you respect. And also, to be humble, humility, and really take an interest, I guess, in people. It's not all necessarily about work, right? It's about the people that are around you. And I think, being respectful and being humble and taking a real genuine interest is probably, important qualities for leadership.
Well, good for you. And what does the future hold? Where do you think you'll be 5 years from now, 10 years from now?
Yeah, well, I think we're super excited about this opportunity in Kazakhstan. I think, part and parcel for the things that, we talked about earlier, we just feel like we're at the right place at the right time. It's definitely a new jurisdiction for me in my career. And so I would hope that, 5 years from now, we're making some great success in this country and discovering copper gold projects and ultimately, helping to put Kazakhstan on a map here in the Western North America in particular for mining development. And I guess on a personal side, continuing to try and spend as much time as I can with my young family and my wife as we kind of maneuver through day-to-day life, right?
Good for you, Darren. Well, thank you so much for being a bridge between Canada and Kazakhstan, between Canada and Central Asia. That's become more important now than ever, I would say, to reinforce those ties, to show that we can continue to do business in the region. And please keep it up.
Well, thanks very much, Nathan. Great to be here. And absolutely, we'll very excited about the future and keen to keep in touch.
I've been joined today by Daren Klinck, President and Director of Aris Minerals, Canadian junior mining and exploration company, and a highly regarded mining executive with a broad range of international experience. Thank you so much for coming today, Darren, and we look forward to our future contacts.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, Nathan.
You've been listening to IceBreakers, a podcast produced by CECC, the Canada-Eurasia Chamber of Commerce, supporting trade, investment, and good relations between Canada and the nations of Eurasia. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe to the show and give us a review on Spotify, Apple, or Google Podcasts. You can join our LinkedIn group to address questions to guests. To find out more about the series or to make a donation, please check out our website at www.ceccpodcast.com. Thanks for tuning in.